Yeah, I would say that the first and the most important thing is to be aware of localization the sooner that you can in your game. Of course, make the content separated from code. And then, of course, if I can add a second one, would be the context. Give context. Why are you choosing those words? What are you saying? Who is talking? Those kind of things.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carla Duke, and today I'm joined by Victor Alonso Leon. Victor is the Director of Client Services at Pink Noise, an independent localization company specializing in text and audio localization, translation, voiceover dubbing, and more. Today, we're going to talk about Victor's 15-plus year journey working with localization in games and helping developers become more aware, appreciative, and prepared for this crucial part of the game dev process. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 8 of season 3 of the Zero to Play podcast. Welcome, Victor, to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So I thought of a really interesting question I'd love to just start the conversation with. So as someone who's probably worked on dozens of titles across different studios in localization, I'm really curious if you were, say, consulting for a game and you kind of walked into the studio and they had a third-party localization team that they'd been working with. How could you tell if that localization team was not delivering the highest quality of localization that they could? Like, what are your tells for the kind of quality that a localization team can deliver to a studio?
Wow, that's a very good question. Yeah, very good question. I would say that the first thing that a localization team needs to be is context seekers. I mean, and sometimes I define localization as we are looking for context everywhere. What's the context of this question? What's the context of this quest? What's the context of all these UI strings that you have? Where are we in the game? What is the situation? And I would say that if you getting these kind of questions would probably show that they are really into the game, understanding and trying to mimic that mindset that the developers had. That's probably the first thing that I would look for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But in that sense, in that way, asking those kind of questions, I feel like it makes localization appear very subjective and very kind of emotion based. Is that kind of how you go about your job, or is there quite a good structure to it as well that you can follow?
Of course, there's lots of. I mean, localization is really a structure work. Sometimes when I explain game localization to other localization people, I always say that it's very, very parallel to medical translation, and they kind of freak out when I say this. But there is a lot of parallelism between the two, in the sense that you have the process itself that needs to be stable on the vendor side and on the developer side. There are lots of third-party things that you have to consider if you're looking at consoles. You have to be compliant with them. That would be the same in the medical field. You have to be compliant with the terminology. You have to understand the context and what is it for. You have to understand the player. So you have to, and that's really the key point, understanding what is the intention of the developer towards the player. And that would be really the key. You were mentioning emotion. I mean, emotion, the same emotion. And when the localization team is working on a game, you really need to mimic or to replicate the same emotions that the developer was trying to get into the game, or to get the players into. Try to transpose that to another language, to maybe to another culture, and that's what.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So do you have any advice for studios that may be looking at getting a localization team on board in terms of any assets or content that they can create, or is it just conversations that you have with them that you get that context, or do you really refer to design documentation and GDDs and that kind of thing? Is that really important for that process to be smooth?
Yeah, normally it is. I mean, of course, the game industry is very secretive, and of course, it's very, very, very difficult to get all the information, and especially very, very difficult for the developers to share all that knowledge, all that information with the teams. Of course, the developers have, at the end, they know what is the idea of what needs to be there: characters descriptions, what is going to happen, what's the story, what's the context of a string, what's the context of that story. Those are the things that the localization teams really need. Of course, there's lots of NDAs, secrecy, security that is involved and needs to be there. It's something that you have to play with. All the information cannot be shared and spread all over the globe to get the localization that you want. But today there are ways to have that knowledge, to share that knowledge. And it's also up to the localization team to ask for the things that are needed. Of course, for the developers, there are lots of information, especially in what content is about. I mean, of course, the localization teams often, not always, but often does not need to see the code itself. It depends a little bit on the type of game that you are localizing, but normally it's all the content, all the story. It's also true that all the information that the players before the game is there are avid to know is related to content. So you have to be, in the localization world, we have to be very, very keen on security, safe, on NDAs, and being very careful on what you are going to say.
Yeah, I have a few questions that I'll touch on later about like how early you can get localization in terms of building a community and kind of building an international community before the game's even live, and kind of how, if you've had any experiences that go into that. But first off, I'd love to just find out, I know you've been in the kind of localization industry for a lot longer than 15 years, which is how long you've been in games for. I'd love to know how your journey started off in just in localization. I know you're bilingual, and I think that growing up in a multicultural family helped. But how did you find localization as a career path that 20 odd years ago?
Yeah, of course. Well, as you say, yeah, I come from a multilingual family. That's for sure. I mean, languages have always been there, and also because of my father's work, we moved a lot, etc. So we were exposed to different countries, etc. Basically, I was studying at university, and I was very interested. I was more in the linguistic part. I mean, I took the easy path. I mean, I was in the linguistic path, but I also was very, very interested in programming, the codes, etc. And one day, I just saw a company that was doing something very weird with JBuilder. They were localizing those kind of material, and I said, "What is that?" Actually, I was very lucky. It was a very small company, but a very, as we say in our industry, it was a direct vendor. They worked with direct clients, and in that case, they were working with Borland. And well, that's where my path started. I mean, I learned a lot about what localization was. Then, of course, what was the management that needs to happen for localization in that company, and then, well, different companies that helped me get into that.
Yeah. So how were you exposed to pink noise, and that how did that journey start?
Yeah, my first exposure to pink noise was in 2001, so very, very early in my career. At that time, pink noise was a monolingual vendor. They were working in very interesting projects also, delivering Spanish localization. And that's a little bit when I got hooked into games. got hooked into what the game localization challenges, etc. Yeah.
Wow. And
I came back to Pink Noise when I came back to Spain a little bit. I was in another in the Netherlands mainly for a few years, also in localization, but in other areas. And I came back to Spain, and I came back to Pink Noise and to the game localization, which is something that's stuck in my heart.
Yeah, and it's great that they have been around this whole time, and I think localization is one of those things that is incredibly important for a game that wants to impact, the entire world, or even just different markets. It's all it takes sometimes is adding a new language to be able to be considered, popular in a different market.
Absolutely.
So Pink Noise, what kind of languages do they offer there in terms of localization?
Right now, I mean, the Pink Noise has evolved a lot in all these years. I mean, growing in terms of team, in terms of capacities, in terms of locations. Right now, we have audio studios and production hubs, as we call them, in Madrid, which is the headquarters, in Mexico City, and in Paris, trying to cover as much time zone as we can. And then in terms of deliverables, and in terms of localization teams, I mean, we mainly cover, of course, the European languages are our core languages, plus Latin America, plus Brazil, but we cover for many games almost every language.
Yeah. And one thing that I've heard a lot of, just because a lot of game studios in New Zealand have Tencent that have invested in the company or the game, and I believe Tencent, they're a huge publisher, and I believe they offer localization type services. Do you know how that works, kind of at a publisher level? Would they get in touch with a third party studio like Pink Noise, or would they do that all in house?
Okay. Well, I'm sure they go to different companies, and of course, I cannot talk about our clients. Publishers often do localization. They often do localization, and they need to go to the experts. I mean, it's the normal thing is to go to the experts. You can have a centralized management, but then after that, you need really the experts, and it's more or less the same in all the layers. I mean, for the translators, you need to have native speakers. You need to go to them, and of course, it's very hard, and it's basically impossible to have that in house for everything. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I read, well, you told me that you're really passionate about culturalization and globalization, and those are two very big words. They mean a lot of things for different people, but I'd love to know to you what that kind of means, and what that means in your kind of journey as someone working in game localization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, related to game localization, especially culturalization, is those aspects that the developers need to take into account when they try to make a game global. There are wonderful experts in specifically in culturalization. I mean, knowing what colors to use, being very careful with what countries you have in your maps, for example, what kind of things you can and cannot talk about, what musics you can put on your game and what musics you cannot. So that is an aspect that is there since the beginning, and it's one of the aspects that makes localization, and in this case, culturalization, to be better in the beginning already of the design of the game. The sooner it is in the design of the game, the better. The better this awareness of cultural issues, cultural benefits that you can get by taking this or that decision, the sooner the better.
Yeah, and another topic that I think goes hand in hand to that is accessibility. Just like another area that can be maybe missed when it comes to it. But how does accessibility play a part in the whole journey of localizing your game?
Of course, localization is part of accessibility somehow. I mean, at the end, having another language is in a game, trying to reach a different culture, a different market is a part of making your game accessible.
Definitely.
And there are lots of processes that are similar. I mean, if you want your game to be accessible to a certain disability, for example, you have to code your game in a certain way. If you want to adapt your game and making it easy to play, there are things that you have to consider. And it actually affects all the players. Normally, when you are considering accessibility topics, you're also making it easier for the whole players of your game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my experience working with localization, Arabic is the hardest because the font is aligned to the right hand side, and that's usually something that is not considered from from the UI teams and that kind of thing. Are there any other kind of best practices that you would advise for at a very early stage when you're building the the basic UI for the game, to consider things like that, just to make localizing a lot easier when you do come to it?
Absolutely, that's the internationalization part that we call in localization. So the more the developers are aware of what they have to do, and there's a lot of information on the net. I know that even Apple, Google, or many blogs talk about those things, and the most important thing is awareness. Being aware that there's something that I have to check, there's something that I have to be aware of. There's the typical thing you just mentioned, the left to right or right to left languages. There's also the double byte symbols when you get to Asian languages, for example, that you have to consider. The length of the text. Depends also on the type of content. I mean, for example, you can have puzzle games where in the way that you create the content, if you make it very, very, very local or very, very into your source language without considering that this might need to be translated at a certain point, then you're making your game not easy to localize.
Yeah, that's interesting. I heard from someone that German is the hardest to translate because they usually have a lot longer words for simple things. Is that correct?
It's correct. I mean, the German can be long, but it can happen with many languages that you have a certain word or a certain expression, and that expression is completely different in another language and needs to be two times longer than the original. So you have to allow for that. You have to allow that for code, but you have to allow it in many places. And when you get to AAA games where audio comes into play, and where you have to get that room of the localized audio into your game, there's also many things to consider. So yes, well, yeah, absolutely, it's one of the essentials.
Yeah, so text localization is something that I'm a lot more familiar with, but when it comes to audio localization, that's one thing I'm actually not that aware of. So are you referring to like dubbing of every single vocal text or vocal sound in a different language, similar to how a TV show would be dubbed in a different language?
Absolutely, there's lots of similarities with dubbing TV series or movies. At the end, most of the games have cinematics, and that will be really exactly the same. I mean, that will be exactly the same. And then you have the more complex thing, and the nitty-gritty part, where you have thousands and thousands of files, of small files, of small words, of small audio files that you have to combine, that are combined in a certain way, that you have to replicate when you're doing the localization. And that's also the big challenge of audio game localization. You don't have, like you would have in a TV series or a movie, the long 1 hour or half an hour show, and then you have to follow that. In a game, and the bigger the game, the more complex, you have thousands and thousands of files that you have to manage, and that makes the thing very, very challenging and very fun also. I mean, there's lots of things, context. You also need to know where the audio is going to be. It involves also how you're going to record. Sometimes the translation might be right, but the intonation needs to be somehow one way or the other, and it's something that needs to be there.
Mm. Yeah, no, you're right. It definitely gets very complicated when it comes to games, and I love that you're certified as a project manager, and that you're really passionate about that, because I think when it comes to localization, that is a really important factor to just keep files organized, which I do want to talk to you a bit about after. But before I forget, do you feel like games that adopt icons and symbols uh make the job for the localization teams easier, instead of having the word exit on a UI pop-up, having an X, something that's universally recognized? Is that like a trend or something that you think could be more widely adopted in games?
It can be in certain contexts, but you also have to be very careful. I mean, that's where culturalization comes into play. Sometimes an X can have certain conditionals for a certain culture, and then completely different to another one. So it's things that you have to consider. Sometimes it helps, absolutely, but sometimes you have to be also careful with those kind of things. Yeah.
Have you ever had to go back to a studio and ask them to change, a symbol or an icon because that isn't appropriate or it doesn't mean the same thing? I find that a really interesting case, because for a game studio, that probably wouldn't be listed in their list of localization text, but it's something that you might pick up as a player.
Absolutely, and it's something that the people doing the localization will see if they are allowed to see it. I mean, it's something that is it's going to happen when you're localizing a game, especially into multilingual versions. Each team, each linguistic team, or each specialist in their culture, in their language, is going to take these things and look at and what is going on. Of course, localization, and it's really important also to understand it. When we do localization, and the first part of localization, which is text translation, you often don't see that part. That's why also in localization, there's another layer of the localization part, which is the linguistic quality assurance part, the LQA as we call it. And there, normally, you can see the things in context. And that's also a step that needs to be there, especially the bigger the game, the more important it is.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It must be hard when you have some games that are very secretive, even to the localization teams, where you probably just get like an Excel spreadsheet, and that's all you have to go off. But I suppose that's the nature of some of the partnerships and the situations that you have to deal with. One area that I want to ask about is when you have player authored text. So when you say you create a new character and you create a name, or if there's like a text chat and things like that, does localization play a part in that at all? For example, a lot of studios that have interaction with other people have blacklists of swear words or inappropriate words. Is that something that goes through the kind of localization pipeline?
It's something that can be part of the localization scope, absolutely, especially the forbidden words, etc. That's also where the technology starts to come into play in certain games. I call them disruptors that we have in the localization industry. Machine translation is one of them. I mean, you get this content or this text created by the users. Sometimes in certain games, people are trying to experiment already with machine translation, and that's where forbidden words are going to come into play, where you have to be aware what is going to happen with that text. So it's related to localization. Normally, it's not something that is going to happen in every game, but it's absolutely something that is completely related.
Yeah, and for the projects that you do deal with that, it must be an ongoing process, right? Because as new words come about, new slang words that are very popular, that come out of nowhere, or whether it's acronyms or even different cultures different words might become inappropriate over time. Is that something that you guys kind of keep your own list and just, keep that up to date? And that's some of the value that you guys provide as a localization studio?
Absolutely. I mean, we always talk about terminology, and terminology is really, really important. You have, I was saying before, you have the platform terminology, you have the game terminology, you have the company, the distributed type of terminology that they want to use, the form of address, all that kind of material is there. There are things that can be replicated in the games, in different games. There's of course a lot of proprietary material for certain publishers, and they have their own lists that you cannot use for other games. But there's also public things. There's also things that are in the culture itself, in the language itself, that need to be prepared and used during localization.
Yeah, I must say I'm overwhelmed at just the amount of work that it must take. And one, I'm grateful that there are studios like Pink Noise that exist, but it's an incredible, just an incredible undertaking to even just the work that it takes to write down, like to make all your text files convertible in the game is a ton of work for developers to do. I'd love to talk a bit about your kind of project management side of your like interests. So when it comes to like tracking localization changes and things like that, what is your kind of basic process for doing that? Whether it's like communicating with the studio, things that you can share, like what kind of software do you use, or how do you manage the lists of text that need to be changed?
Of course. Well, the first thing to mention is that, of course, depending on the engine that the developer is using, you can have more easier paths or more difficult paths. I mean, and we talked about internationalization, and there are lots of engines that are already considering those kind of things. When we talk about how to manage changes, how to manage the way that the content is there are lots of checks that you can do, and there are lots of checks that we do. We have the scripts, we have the audio files that we receive, we make the match, we see what is there. Then we have the technology that helps us. Of course, you have a comparison, the same that you will have that any developer would have. I mean, when they're comparing code, what changes? Well, we basically use the same in localization to see what changes. And then, of course, we all have the very specific localization tools. We have what we call the Cad Tools, or the computer-assisted translation, which is not machine translation at all. It's basically just to simplify, and it's a database when you have source and target, and then all that you can play with it. And if something changes in the source, then you have a warning that it needs to be changed in the target too. So all these kind of tools help a lot. They're essential nowadays for any type of translation. And all the comparisons, the management, at the end, you have to manage a CMS of localization into multiple languages. And that's what you have to do.
Yeah, wow. Are there any engines that you think are further ahead than others in the industry at the moment when it comes to making localization easier?
Well, yeah, it's hard for me to say, because there are lots of engines, and there's lots of preferences also. I would say that for localization, the most important part is that your engine is able to export that content and import that content easily. I mean, that's the most important part. And the localization teams are going to do what they have to do with those files, even if it's Excel files or XML files. We are going to make what needs to be done to make those Excel files or XML files in a different language, and so you have to import them back. So I would say that any developer that needs to look into that needs to be sure that content code is separated, that it's easily exportable and importable.
Yeah, that's fair. a thought came to my mind with audio localization. Obviously, you know, if you were working on a AAA title and you have a big cinematic sequence, you probably have, you know, very talented actors that have trained their whole lives to perform. When you do the audio localization, are you focused on the kind of delivery of those lines to make sure that there is, you know, emotional, and do you have like a casting process? Is that all managed on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that is there. You have the input from the original. If we don't do it, because well, sometimes you do also the original source and the original English most of the time. So you do that. And once it gets into the localization process, you have the linguist, of course, that gives the input. And then you have, and we use exactly the same professionals that are used in the TV and movie industry, exactly the same people. We use artistic directors, the audio engineers are of course experts in dubbing. So it's absolutely the process, the artistic process. So we call it, sometimes you have the technical process, the engineering that is there, the project management process, so all the management of the assets, and then you have the artistic, which includes the translation and all the dubbing part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah,
Wow.
and the artistic direction and a general creative direction is essential in many games. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge undertaking. It's really great to hear that you're using the same, you know, people or you know, people as the film and TV industry, and just knowing that games are kind of on par professionally with the kind of quality that you see in film and TV, which is good to hear for the games industry as a whole. Do you think that there's more that the games industry could do to kind of get to the same level as like different you know, different industries like film? Do you think we're behind, or do you think we're pretty much on par?
No, actually, I don't. I don't think, especially for triple A's and big projects, we are not behind at all. I mean, it's the same in the source or the audio that is dubbed or is recorded in the source language. I mean, they're using the same actors, the same level of quality. And you look at the dubbing industry in the US, it's professional actors that know how to do to put all the emotion, and it's basically the same people that are doing games, TV shows, and movies. Of course, it depends on the country, depends on how they are trained, etc. In certain countries, there is a certain separation between picture actors or actors that appear in the movies and actors that are doing the dubbing. I mean, just especially thinking of Spain and France, for example, where the dubbing actors are professional dubbing actors, and some, of course, are theatrical actors, but some are not, and they're just used to doing their dubbing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I feel like that on its own is a whole conversation. In today's supporter segment, I'd like to bring to your attention the Game Dev Global Summit 2021. It is a fully virtual conference hosted by Geekle, taking place on August 31st to September 2nd this year. There's 2 available tracks, a free junior track or a paid senior track, where there'll be 30 plus hours of content from 40 plus speakers with an expected 10,000 registered users. For more info on all the events taking place, you can visit their site geekle.us/gamedev. And if you use the promo code ZTP25, you can get 25% off the full admission price. Side note, I'll also be giving a talk in the free junior track titled Production Advice for When You Have No Producer, so feel free to stop by and listen to that if you're interested. Back to the show. Yeah, there was a topic I wanted to ask you about, and that's the kind of localization life cycle. I know you mentioned this, and I'd just love to know what that looks like. If you can explain just kind of the beginning to end process of the life cycle and how that plays with content, the content life cycle as well.
Absolutely. It's basically, and it's something that I always try to explain. It really goes very in parallel to what the narrative or the text is created. So we have to separate in the way that we do the thing. We have to separate what is the narrative part, which is the UI part, which is the legal text that appears there, or the websites or the forums, etc. And at the end, you have to compile all these things, make them work together, make sure that you are following the glossaries, that you're following the same styles, etc. And in terms of the life cycle of that, that's a little bit what I was thinking about, how you update the thing, how you are adding more content. And all the things really have to go in parallel with development. And nowadays, with the games being bigger and bigger and bigger, and you see games that are continuously evolving, maybe a few years ago, you could have games that were completely finished. This is a package, make it, localize it, and have it. Nowadays, especially with PC games, I think that almost every game, there's a continuous evolution. And then we made, in the localization industry, we sort of made a parallel to that, and we called it continuous localization. You probably are, when you're doing localization of a game, you are tackling smaller portions of game, but that every day, a small part, which goes in parallel to how the content is created in the game itself, in the original language. So the management is heavier. It's heavier. What it allows, of course, is more communication with the developers. There's a better link, a better understanding, because, well, you also have the possibility of making changes, improving, etc. That's something that before, when there was a game that would close, localize, etc., was not there.
I'm really interested because games that, there's quite a few games on, say, Steam, for example, that release as early access, or, release in like a beta phase and kind of develop with their community. How is it possible for localization to stay up to date with, regular patch updates, whether it's like weekly patches that get out, that go out to the to a new build that's live? How hard is it for localization to keep up with that? Do you guys usually lag behind, or do you ask for an extra day or two so that you can make sure that you have enough time to add this new content? Because I'm just wondering, a lot of studios are very agile nowadays, where they're trying to put out content as quickly as possible. How can localization keep up with that?
And you have to keep the same pace. I mean, you have to keep the same pace and be as agile as your clients are. It's absolutely important. And the team, and as I was saying, the process needs to be quick, easy, and absolutely prepared for all of that. And that is also coming back to your original question: what do you have to look for? If your team needs to be prepared for that and needs to be able to deliver on time. It's really a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge because it's a challenge for the developer to get to that patch, to get that. And the earlier the localization teams are involved in order to translate those things, and that the launch is international, the better.
Yeah, it's funny because initially when I thought of localization, I imagined an Excel spreadsheet with 9,000 lines that you need to kind of just go through one by one and translate with the language that you know of. But as soon as you put a time constraint on that, you have till the end of the day to get this done. I feel like that would it would put a lot of pressure just to, you need to spend a lot of time thinking. And like you're saying, thinking about the context of where it is in the game. And I don't even know what question to ask, because that just sounds like a really tough job for those localization people.
It's not easy, but it's preparation. I mean, at the end, it's preparation, being prepared, having the material, make that preparation material evolve. I mean, the glossaries are bigger and bigger and bigger with each release, bigger with each little launch. The style guides need to be updated. What I mentioned before, your assets, the translation assets are there. You can reutilize the same lines if they were there. You have to be aware of this is important because this goes to the user and is very visible. This is going to be launched on this day. This is going to be something critical, and we are going to do a patch that is going to make this better. So all those things need to be there, and the better the communication, the better the results will be.
Yeah, wow. How probably you probably can't answer that, but how many people usually work on a localization document? Do you have one person for each language, or is it da- is there any kind of value that you can add to understand a bit more how
Yeah,
that process
it's
works?
difficult because one size does not fit all. I mean,
Yeah,
that's it's absolutely. You can have small games where you can have one person for per language is not going to happen, because you always need at least a translator and a reviewer
yeah.
per language. So it's something that is going to be there. So with small games, you will have a small amount of people, but any multilingual game is going to have more and more people the more you add languages and the more you add steps to it. So in big games where you have a multilingual localization to handle, there's lots of people. At the end, you have, of course, there is someone in each language that is going to be responsible for taking the essential decisions. Normally, there's also a backup. So one of the lead translators is going to be the backup of the reviewer or of the linguistic person that is going to tackle and is going to prepare the essential documentation. So and then of course the more you go up in the process, then there will be less people. I mean in the multilingual projects. But yeah, at least just if you want a number, I mean, for a small game, you will have at least 2 people per language,
Yeah.
plus someone coordinating, plus someone managing the assets. So at the end, it's always a big team working on games.
There's no prodigy out there that knows 9 languages that can localize a whole game on their own.
No, that never works. That never works. It can probably work for one word, but you always have to be very careful. And that one word is going to be the one that is going to be wrongly interpreted. So no.
Totally. If anyone listening is really interested in pursuing a career in localization or as a translator, what kind of advice could you give them for what direction to go, whether it's university courses or resources online? What advice would you give them for that?
Yeah, it also depends on the culture, on the countries they are, on the continent they are. But basically, there are 2 ways. I mean, when we talk to our game localization peers, there are the ones that come from linguistics or from being translators. So the first thing, if you want to be a translator, is to learn linguistics, to study languages, and then there are all over the world very good universities about that tackle translation, that tackle languages. So that's the first part. The first and easy path to get into localization. And then, of course, this is like any niche in translation. You have to be an expert in your niche if you want to be an expert in. Even if we just talk about games. It's not this, you might be an expert in baseball games or football games, but not at all in a flight simulator. So that's a little bit the thing. And then you have many people that come from the management part or come from the producer side of things in games that got into game localization. Normally, these people, I say, are not the ones that are going to translate at all, but they are going to be in-game localization, the experts in the assets, in the knowledge, in all the important localization aspects that at the end are
It's probably
communication.
Really
Absolutely.
Yeah, wow. Okay. That's really good to know. I saw I saw that you've done a few talks at GDC and also at universities and things like that. Is there any kind of talk in particular that you've done that maybe had like a certain message that you delivered that you would like to echo now in the podcast? Like, is there one thing that you're really passionate about that you spoke about that you could share with us now?
Yeah, I would say that the first and the most important thing is to be aware of localization the sooner that you can in your game. Even if you are a small developer doing your thing in a garage, I mean, think that your game might be global very quickly. So the first thing is being aware of different languages, how the different languages are approaching the content that you're going to create. Of course, make the content separated from code. That's a given already most of the time. But that will be, so the sooner you get into localization, the sooner you're aware of localization, and the sooner you start to tackle localization in your development process, the better. That would be, I think, the most important thing. And then, of course, if I can add a second one, would be the context. Give context. Why are you choosing those words? What are you saying? Who is talking? Those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I feel like context can, you can spend probably hours adding context, and it's just probably one of those ongoing things. You find out the pieces of context that do really matter at the end of the day, and that's just something that you probably just learn over time. Yeah, that's really cool. There was one question I had. Oh yeah, so I mentioned earlier about how a lot of games are building their communities as the kind of games in early access and before they've launched to build hype and to kind of build the game with the community. And a lot of those communities now are starting to be like assets and like content is being translated to different languages at that stage before the game is even localized. And I guess my question is, how early have you gotten onto a game before, and how early can you get into a game? Because I imagine there is you can't really start localizing midway through development, because I think a lot of the infrastructure is still being created. But what are your thoughts on that, on how early localization can get into it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's lots of games that when this hype exists, at the end, these users are sort of, and I'm going to make again the parallels with medical translation or with life science translation, they're going to become the subject matter experts. And these are gold for us also when we are tackling these kind of games. You have a game, and then you know that the community has, or maybe it also happens with games that have certain languages localized and some not. And then you have experts in those games in another version, and then suddenly they are confronted with the new localization that is going to happen with their language. And normally these people, these subject matter experts on the game, are excited about it and want to participate in that. So what the localization team, the localization professionals are probably going to do is, of course, depending on the NDAs, depending on what the developer is allowing you to do. But if you can get some of these experts in your game to say, this is what I want to see in the game, this is how I want you to name it, this is how I want this to be addressed, this is normally wonderful, because you don't have to recreate, to assume what the community is going to like. The community is there already, and it's going to tell you what they like and what they prefer.
It's interesting on YouTube, for example. A lot of the closed captions can be done. They can be sourced by community members, and people can write their own translations or even just subtitles for videos. Do localization teams kind of onboard the community to kind of provide localization text for certain situations?
Could be happening in certain very specific situations. Normally, what we are localizing, on the content that we are localizing, is, as I'm saying, more protected. It's not that open. Of course, it depends on the game, but it's not that open. It's not something that you can share with the community and make it happen. Of course, the linguistic aspect is also very important. At the end, the linguists and the professional linguists need to be there to translate the content. As I'm saying, you can use the community for games that are already there, that are that have a community. Even if it's not localized, you can use them as an asset. Normally, it's the professional linguist that is going to translate that part. And when you mentioned the more the evolution of the game, the more patches, the more launches, the more the continuous localization is necessary. You have to be a pro to be there in the pipeline, prepared to make the translation. If we have to go to other people that are not doing that every day, it's going to be difficult to be at the same pace as the developers need us to be.
Yeah, wow. There was one kind of topic that I wanted to touch on in this conversation. I've really appreciated all the value you've shared, by the way. This is really awesome just to get a glimpse behind, what actually happens in localization and the kind of things you care about. But one area that I am curious to know if it's going to continue to affect us going forward. It's affecting a lot of other industries, but things like machine learning and AI and how that is changing the localization space. Is there any kind of innovation or any kind of topics that you can talk about regarding those things happening in the world right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, and it happens with all the industries, and it also happens to the translation and localization industry. AI is affecting the workflows, how we are managing these assets, how we are managing the communication. You see the workflows that are much more efficient than before. AI is going to affect the way that we handle those workflows. Selecting the translator, knowing who is available, all those kind of things are going to be affected. And in the specific to localization industry, we have machine translation, neural machine translation that is going to disrupt. I call them the really disruptors, but you have to be to adapt to them. I mean, we will have certainly in the coming years better engines, better neural machine translations that are going to make. At this point, I mean, it also depends on the kind of content. The more boring the content, the easier it is for machines to translate it. So the more emotional, the more exciting, the more narrative a text is, the more you need the pro linguist. That's for the moment what is happening. Of course, machine translation is helping in productivity, and it's something that happens. I mean, that is going to make things more productive. That's for sure. And then, of course, if we want to go to audio, there's lots of things that are happening nowadays. Text to speech, the dubbing, how the mock-up capture is going to is evolving. All those things are going to change the industry for sure. So it's something that is there, that you have to be aware of, that you have to continue observing, participating, and working together with the clients too, to see what is interesting for you, what kind of content is adapted to this new technology, what type of content is not adapted to this technology. It's a continuous communication. Something is going to evolve. And it's something very exciting also to see that you're in an industry that is evolving, is changing, is getting new things to be done.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love that it's an area that you guys are aware of, but at the end of the day, you have professional linguists and professional translators that, that's their career that they've dedicated their lives to, that they're passionate about, and that's what you guys fall back on at the end of the day. It's what are your thoughts on things like Google Translate and just maybe a studio's using that to do some localization? Are you very against services like that, or do you think that the technology is kind of at a good enough stage that it can be trusted to a certain degree?
Being against it is not really an option. I mean, if they're going to use it, they're going to use it. Normally, the type of content and the output that they're going to get, that's what I was mentioning with the machine translation. If you just need to translate exit, you don't have a lot of interesting content to localize, probably. Yeah. And that is going to be the thing. And then if you have a long story, you have a storyline, you have a rich context, you have rich content to localize. The fact that you're going to translate a few words with Google Translate is not going to make a difference at all. You better have it well done, and translate it. So of course there are games where you just have an exit button and a few this kind of thing. So this is, but you still have to be careful. I mean, there are lots of jokes and lots of memes about what machine translation can do out of context in many games. And of course, this technology does not always work as well in some language combinations as in others. So it's something that that also needs to be taken into consideration. Depends on the quality that you expect for your game at the end. You're not going to make it an automated translation of a legal text. You're probably going to go to somebody specialized in that. And if your baby has a story, has an interesting thing, you are transmitting a message to the audience. You are transmitting an emotion to the audience. It's probably yet, I don't know, in 30 years or in 20 years, but it's probably yet not the space for automating that yet.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely sold. I really appreciate how you've made me have an appreciation for localization teams and how they do really care about the emotion and delivering the same intent behind it, which is, it's something that might not be easy to see when you just look at text, but knowing that there's an actual human behind it that's put thought into it. And I definitely think that's not a job that will be replaced with technology. And it is something that is important, is to bring that emotion into different languages so that those different cultures can be impacted in the same ways. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your passion and your thoughts on localization. That's all the time we have for today. But if anyone is interested in following Victor in his localization journey and the kind of work that he's doing at Pink Noise, you can follow him on LinkedIn at Victor Alonso Leon, or on Twitter at VALION. And I'm sure he'd love to hear from you guys. If anyone listening is at a stage in their project that they need localization, or they need someone to bounce questions off that they're concerned about when it comes to localization, I'm sure Victor would love to hear from you guys and would love to support. So thank you so much, Victor. And is there anything else you want to end on for the people listening?
Well, thank you very much, Carl. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the interesting questions. And as I'm saying, be aware of localization. Be aware that there is a diverse world over there, that there are lots of cultures and languages and people that don't know your or language that want to play your games. So that's there's an opportunity to make game global, going to the localization professionals.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Victor, and all the best. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much for your time, Carl. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. You can follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or any other podcasting service. Other than that, you can find links to this episode down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next week for the next episode.